My older stepbrother had a knack for making my life a constant struggle, but now it was my turn to take control. I'm Ethan, a 24-year-old man, and I grew up with my stepbrother, Victor, who is now 28. For as long as I can remember, he has been the favored one, the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was left as an afterthought, always expected to be the mature one. My father remarried when I was 10, and Victor, who was 14 at the time, entered our lives with an air of entitlement. It didn't take long for the favoritism to become apparent. My stepfather treated Victor like royalty. Whenever he wanted something, it was granted without question. If I asked for anything, suddenly there were financial concerns or other priorities that took precedence. My dad wasn't a bad father, but he was passive, always trying to avoid conflict. He would tell me to be the bigger person whenever Victor did something hurtful, and that became the pattern. Victor would create problems, and I would have to deal with the fallout. At first, it was small things, taking my clothes without asking, borrowing my belongings and never returning them, making snide comments about my appearance or how I wasn't as fashionable as he was. But over time, it escalated. If I had a crush on a girl at school, he would ensure she was interested in him instead. If I had a group of friends, he would insert himself and gradually turn them against me. By the time I realized what he was doing, the damage was already done. One of the most devastating moments came when I secured a summer internship at a prestigious company. It was a significant achievement for me, something I had worked tirelessly to obtain. But Victor, in a so-called accident, deleted an important email, which meant I missed the deadline for the necessary paperwork. When I confronted him, he feigned innocence, claiming he thought I had already taken care of it and that he was just trying to help. Naturally, my dad and stepfather sided with him, dismissing my concerns as an overreaction. That was Victor's game. He never did anything outright cruel that could be proven. It was always misunderstandings or accidents twisted just enough to make me look like the problem. When it came time for college, I had my heart set on an out-of-state school. I got accepted and had everything lined up, but Victor, of course, had his opinions. He convinced my parents that it was too far and too expensive, and they agreed, saying it would be better for me to stay closer to home. Meanwhile, when he applied to schools, there were no issues. They helped him with tuition, bought him a car, and sent him off without hesitation. When I brought it up, my father simply said, "It's different, Ethan. We're in a different financial situation now." I swallowed my resentment, kept my head down, attended a local college, and figured that if I worked hard enough, I could make something of myself despite everything. But Victor made sure I never forgot my place. He dropped passive-aggressive comments about how small-town my school was or how he couldn't imagine settling for anything less than his dream school. Then came the engagement party, which turned out to be the final straw. I had been with my fiancée, Jane, for 3 years. She was amazing, supportive, and unlike the girls from high school, she saw right through Victor from the beginning. When we got engaged, my family surprisingly rallied around us, and I started to think that maybe, just maybe, this was my moment to have something good without Victor ruining it. I was wrong. On the night of the engagement party, Victor showed up in a tuxedo, a custom-tailored suit that practically made him look like the groom. He ensured he was the center of attention, clinking his glass dramatically during the toast to share a humiliating childhood story about me that made me look foolish. He flirted with Jane's maid of honor and pulled my parents aside for an important talk. By the end of the night, half the guests were talking about him instead of my engagement. Jane noticed my anger and asked, "Are you seriously going to let him get away with this?" For the first time, I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I had always let him get away with it. My whole life, I had allowed him to win. That night, I decided I was done. No more sitting back while he walked all over me, no more letting him turn people against me, and no more swallowing my anger and pretending everything was fine. This time, I was going to take action. Victor had spent years making my life miserable, ruining opportunities, and stealing my happiness piece by piece, but he had never faced any real consequences. That was about to change. After the disaster of the engagement party, I stopped playing the time. Victor found himself on the defensive, and I wasn't even trying that hard. I simply allowed the truth to linger in the air for everyone to see. This became my new strategy: no anger, no dramatic confrontations, just calm, composed reality checks. And it worked. I stopped reacting to Victor's usual jabs. Instead, I embraced the role of the mature, successful brother who had moved on from petty drama. It drove him insane. He was used to me snapping back, getting frustrated, and making myself look like the overdramatic one, but now he had nothing to work with. Meanwhile, I had bigger things to focus on. A few weeks later, I received a job offer, an excellent one, the kind of opportunity Victor would have sabotaged in the past. I made sure he had zero access to my application process, ensuring there was no way for him to interfere. When I officially accepted the position, I waited until we were all gathered for a family dinner to mention it. "My new company is flying me out for training next month," I said casually while scrolling through my phone. "It's a really great opportunity." Victor's smile tightened. "Oh, I thought you were still looking." I just shrugged, feeling a sense of satisfaction as he processed the news. But then Victor pulled a classic move. He announced that he was getting married. I wasn't even surprised. He had been with his fiancée, Brianna, for a little over a year. Their relationship wasn't exactly stable, but Victor never let something like that stop him. The moment he saw me happy and moving forward in life, he had to upstage me, and he made sure to do it publicly, right in the middle of dinner. Brianna didn't even look that excited, to be honest. She smiled and nodded, but there was something off in her expression, subtle, but I noticed it. I started paying closer attention. Then something unexpected happened. One of the girls Victor had stolen from me in high school reached out. She sent a casual message saying she had been reminiscing about old times and, surprise surprise, she now realized Victor had been manipulative. She apologized for believing his lies back then. It wasn't much, but it proved something. People were starting to see through him. That's when I decided to lean into my next move, social media. I wasn't posting anything directly about Victor, of course, but I began subtly reclaiming my narrative. I shared pictures of myself with mutual friends, casual mentions of career wins, and throwback posts of college memories. Harmless but effective. The version of me that Victor had built over the years, the weak, dramatic little stepbrother, didn't match reality anymore, and people noticed. It worked even better at social events. At one party, Victor told a story about how he had helped me with my college applications. I didn't even argue, I just laughed and said, "Help? Oh, you mean when you convinced our parents that my dream school was too expensive?" That was so helpful. The laughter that followed wasn't for him. The best part was that Brianna, his fiancée, was starting to catch on. Victor had always been careful about what he revealed to her, but now the cracks were forming. She didn't know about his habit of stealing other guys' crushes, his history of manipulation, or the things he had said about her before they got engaged. Then, a mutual friend, someone who had also been burned by Victor, reached out to Brianna. They had proof, old messages Victor had sent mocking her, treating her as a backup plan. I didn't send it myself, I didn't have to. The truth had a way of surfacing on its own. An old group chat message where Victor had mocked her, calling her a safe choice and joking that she was better than being alone, accidentally made its way to her. Just like that, Victor's perfect little world began to shift. He wasn't getting the reactions he expected, people weren't laughing at his jokes the way they used to. Family members weren't blindly taking his side, and Brianna was paying much closer attention now. Victor tried to regain control at another family gathering. He threw out a classic humiliation attempt, loudly commenting on how awkward I had been in school and how cute it was that I had finally come out of my shell. But this time, I didn't just sit there. I smiled and said, "Yeah, Victor, I was awkward in high school. It must have been tough for you constantly chasing after my leftovers." The room erupted in laughter, and for the first time, the joke was on him. He knew it. That was when I realized this wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking back my life, and I was just getting started. Victor's wedding planning turned into a full-scale production overnight. He wanted a lavish venue, a designer tuxedo. Extravagant Victor laughed off my comments, dismissing them as trivial, but Brianna wasn't convinced. The seed of doubt had been planted, and from that moment on, she began to view him differently. I knew the truth, I had witnessed it firsthand. He tried to gaslight her, claiming it wasn't serious, that it was just a fling, but Brianna wasn't buying it. The next time I saw them together, the energy was off. Victor was tense, and Brianna seemed distracted. He pulled me aside, his tone overly sweet. "I know what you're doing," he said. I simply smiled and asked, "What do you mean?" That's when he snapped, loudly accusing me of trying to ruin his wedding, claiming I was jealous, vindictive, and bitter. I didn't raise my voice or react emotionally, I just shrugged and replied, "I'm just making sure everyone knows the full truth." A few relatives exchanged glances, and for the first time, Victor wasn't in control of the narrative, and he knew it. Brianna began investigating on her own. She reached out to old friends and looked into the stories Victor had told her. It didn't take long for her to find more inconsistencies. Then came the biggest shift yet. One of our uncles, who had always remained neutral, openly defended me. "He's not lying," he said bluntly. "Victor has done this kind of thing for years." Victor's face dropped. He tried to do damage control, suddenly becoming overly nice to me, complimenting my outfit and asking about my job, acting as if we were best friends. I didn't fall for it, and neither did Brianna. She told him they should slow down on wedding planning, that maybe they needed to take some time to ensure they were on the same page. Victor lost it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't getting what he wanted just by manipulating people. He called me a homewrecker, accused me of poisoning Brianna's mind, and said I was trying to ruin his happiness. I just laughed and said, "Victor, this is just the beginning," before walking away, leaving him standing there, furious, panicked, and for the first time ever, completely powerless. Word about Victor's past began to spread. Conversations shifted at family gatherings, people hesitated before blindly taking his side. A few old friends distanced themselves quietly, no dramatic breakups, just less enthusiasm to engage. The change was subtle at first but undeniable. His influence was waning, not through scandal but through accumulated doubt. At first, Victor ignored it, acting as if everything was normal, maintaining the same smug attitude he always had. But I noticed something different. Brianna wasn't as affectionate anymore. She wasn't as quick to agree with him, and when he spoke, she listened differently, as if she were actually questioning things. Then she stopped talking about wedding plans. Victor noticed and tried to push things forward, casually bringing up finalizing dates and booking venues. Brianna stalled, suggesting they should take their time to ensure they were both on the same page. Victor's smile remained in place, but I could tell he was panicking. Then the fake apologies started. He pulled me aside at a family event, acting unusually sweet, asking about my job and saying he wanted to put the past behind us. It was so obvious this wasn't an apology, it was damage control. I didn't reject him outright, I just smiled and played along. He wasn't fooling anyone. Then something interesting happened. One of Victor's old friends reached out to Brianna, someone from years ago, someone Victor had long since cut off. Apparently, he had been lying about his past. Brianna had believed he had never been in a serious relationship before, that's what he had told her, anyway. The truth was, he had a long-term girlfriend in college, a messy breakup, and he had hidden all of it. Brianna confronted him, but he tried to laugh it off and make excuses. She wasn't buying it. Then Victor snapped. He found me alone after dinner, cornering me in the hallway. His face was red, and his voice was low and sharp. He accused me of ruining his life, destroying his relationship, and being obsessed with him. I didn't argue or yell, I just shrugged and said, "I didn't do anything, Victor. I just told the truth." That's when he really lost it. I stood there, letting him rant, and when he was done, I walked away. For the first time, he had no control over the situation. Then I found out something even worse. Victor was in financial trouble. He had always lived beyond his means, fancy vacations, designer clothes, expensive dinners. I had assumed Brianna was funding it, but it turned out she wasn't. He had maxed out multiple credit cards, and Brianna had no idea. Blame but himself. He tried to convince Brianna that I was the one who had always been jealous and was trying to break them up, but she wasn't buying it. By this point, too many things weren't adding up, and her family was done. They had been willing to help with the wedding before, but after seeing the truth, they pulled their financial support. No more blank checks, no more expensive gifts. If Victor wanted a lavish wedding, he was going to have to pay for it himself.
He lost it at the next family dinner.
In front of everyone, he snapped, his voice rising and his face turning red. He pointed at me, called me a liar, and accused me of ruining his life. The room fell silent, no one took his side. Even my father, who had always let Victor get away with everything, looked embarrassed. My stepfather's mouth was pressed into a thin line, his eyes darting between us, unsure whether to step in or let Victor self-destruct.
And that's exactly what he was doing. Brianna stood up, muttered something about needing to go, and left.
Victor's face drained of color as he realized he had just made everything worse.
The next few days were a mess.
He called Brianna constantly, leaving long messages begging her to talk. He cried, promised he would change, and swore he just needed a chance to explain, but it was too late.
Brianna wasn't coming back.
A week later, she officially put the wedding on hold indefinitely, and that was it.
Victor floundered, trying to salvage the situation by reassuring Brianna and spinning stories to make himself seem like the victim.
But the charm that had once worked was wearing thin, doubt had taken root, and no amount of pleading could undo it.
Brianna made the difficult decision to call off the wedding, quietly moving her things out of their shared space.
Victor's panic turned inward, but instead of gloating, I simply moved forward, focusing on my own life and leaving him to handle the mess he had created.
I saw him one last time before everything collapsed completely.
He looked exhausted, the confident, smug expression he always carried was gone.
I didn't gloat or rub it in.
I just looked at him and said, "You spent your whole life trying to tear me down. Now you're standing in the rubble of your own mess."
Then I walked away.
For the first time, Victor had to deal with the consequences of his own actions. Victor was officially out of my life, and for the first time, I felt free. No more dealing with his drama, no more worrying about what lie he was telling next. He had spent years trying to make my life miserable, but now he was too busy dealing with the wreckage of his own mistakes. While he spiraled, I thrived.
Work was going better than ever.
A few months after Brianna left Victor, I got promoted to the same position Victor had once tried to sabotage. I was excelling, and management took notice of my hard work, offering me a leadership position with a raise, better hours, and more respect. It was everything I had worked for. Victor, of course, tried to pretend like nothing had changed.
He posted inspirational quotes about healing and growth all over social media, as if he hadn't just torpedoed his own life. But people weren't buying it.
Friends distanced themselves, and he wasn't getting invited to gatherings as much.
Even family events felt different, people weren't as eager to defend him anymore. Then Brianna moved on. It happened fast.
A few months after the breakup, she started seeing someone new, someone kind, low drama, the complete opposite of Victor.
And Victor lost it.
He didn't say it outright, but I knew it was killing him. He posted passive-aggressive rants about how people move on too quickly and how some men pretend to be nice but are actually snakes. No names, but it was obvious who he was talking about. Meanwhile, his financial situation kept getting worse.
Without Brianna helping to cover expenses, his debt caught up to him.
He had always lived beyond his means, expecting someone else to clean up the mess, but this time there was no one to bail him out. He started selling things, designer watches, jewelry, anything he could get quick cash for. Then something I never thought I'd hear happened. My father admitted he had treated me unfairly. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was something. He mentioned how he had been too lenient with Victor and how he should have been more supportive of me. Maybe it was because he finally saw Victor's true colors, or maybe because he realized I had been right all along. Either way, it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was ever going to get. Victor, of course, refused to take accountability. He tried for a comeback, posting selfies with captions about starting fresh and new beginnings, cleaning up his messes. His usual tricks weren't working anymore, and it was clear he was starting to panic. Just as I expected, he tried to crawl back into my life. A message popped up on my phone, long, overly sweet, and full of fake remorse. He wanted to rebuild our brotherhood, said he regretted the past, and hoped we could move forward together. It was obvious he wasn't sorry, he was desperate. I ignored it. A day later, another message arrived, this time praising my career growth and expressing admiration for how I had come into my own. I still ignored it.
Then he started posting on Instagram and Facebook.
His entire feed turned into a motivational seminar, filled with quotes about self-growth, healing from negativity, and learning to let go of toxic people. It was a total rebrand, as if he could erase everything he had done just by pretending to be a new person.
Nobody was buying it.
The people who once supported him had moved on, he had burned too many bridges. Invitations to parties, weekend getaways, and brunches had dried up. Even the friends who had been his loyal followers in the past were keeping their distance. Then came the job trouble. Victor had always been reckless at work, lying about his qualifications and passing off others' work as his own. When things were going well, he had enough charm to get away with it, but now the cracks were showing.
HR got involved after multiple co-workers filed complaints.
His attitude had worsened, his performance had dropped, and he was one step away from getting fired.
With nowhere else to turn, he tried the family angle.
He started visiting our father more often, acting like the perfect son. Suddenly, he was all about family values and cherishing every moment together.
I stayed out of it. I wasn't going to get dragged into whatever game he was playing.
At family events, he tried to make small talk with me, asking about work and my social life, pretending we had some kind of bond.
I kept my responses short and neutral. I didn't play into it, but I also didn't give him a reason to play the victim. He hated it.
So he switched tactics, guilt-tripping me with long messages about how family should stick together, how he missed our bond, and how he hated that things had turned out this way.
I wasn't falling for it.
I sent a single reply, "Funny how you only miss me when no one else is left to entertain your games."
That was it. He snapped, accusing me of being cold, bitter, and vindictive. He called me the real manipulator and said I had ruined his life out of petty jealousy. I blocked his number. That was the end of it.
Even my father, who had always overlooked Victor's behavior, finally admitted that I had handled things the right way. He saw Victor's pattern now, he saw how different life was without his constant drama.
And me? I kept moving forward.
Victor's downfall was never my responsibility, it was his own doing, and I wasn't looking back. Victor had no one left to manipulate, and it was eating him alive. No fiancé, no friends, no family members willing to clean up his mess. Every time he tried to claw his way back into the social circle he once dominated, he was met with cold indifference.
That's when he started blaming me for everything.
Suddenly, I was the reason he lost Brianna, I was the reason he had money problems. I was the villain in his downfall, not his own selfish decisions. Of course, Victor never accepted defeat quietly. With nowhere else to direct his anger, he did the one thing I should have seen coming, he tried to sabotage my job. A carefully worded complaint was sent to my company, accusing me of misconduct. It was strategic, specific enough to sound plausible but vague enough to avoid direct scrutiny. The email came from a burner account, but my boss had seen enough corporate games to recognize a personal attack.
HR quietly investigated, but my spotless record made it easy to dismiss. Then came a slip-up.
Victor had shared the same phrasing with a former co-worker of mine in a message weeks prior. When that co-worker reached out, it was clear who was behind the attempt. Victor's plan had backfired. The moment I heard that, I knew he had finally crossed a legal line. A mutual friend, someone who had distanced themselves from Victor but still kept tabs, let him know that if he kept up the harassment, I could take legal action.
That's when he panicked.
A weak, pathetic apology email landed in my inbox, something about how he had been emotional and regretted what he had done. There was no real responsibility taken, no acknowledgement of the damage he tried to cause.
I saved the email as evidence and then ignored him. He wasn't worth the energy anymore.
But Victor wasn't done embarrassing himself.
He played one last.